This is Vermont Edition. I'm Michaela Lafrac. Two new executive orders will come out of the White House today with Trump's signature on them. The orders will intensify the Trump administration's immigration crackdown. One calls for a list of sanctuary cities and states, places that don't cooperate with federal immigration enforcement. As these and other federal level changes occur, Vermont is in the midst of key budget negotiations. Lawmakers are trying to figure out exactly how much the state should spend in the next year on things like infrastructure projects, education, and public health. They're also trying to keep possible federal spending cuts in mind. Change is in the air. But through it all, Governor Phil Scott has been at the helm here in Vermont. He was first elected governor in 2016, and he's now in the midst of his fifth term. We have him with us for most of the next hour. Governor Phil Scott, welcome back to the program.
Good afternoon.
And if you have questions for Vermont's governor, you can call in and join our conversation at 800-639-2211. You can also send us an email to vermontedition@vermontpublic.org. Well, Governor, we're so glad to have you with us today. And I want to start by asking you about some of the statements that a number of Vermont's other top elected officials have been making in the past few months about the Trump administration. I mean, Senator Bernie Sanders has been barnstorming with his Fight Oligarchy tour. Lieutenant Governor John Rogers spoke at the Hands Off rally in Montpelier earlier this month. And I've read all of your statements in response to federal news of the day, and you seem generally to have taken a more measured approach and have not spoken at any big protests or rallies. Why not?
Well, I think I've taken the same approach that many Democrat governors have taken across the country, trying to focus on the issues that affect us the most on a day-to-day basis and let the congressional delegation handle the federal issues. And I understand that some people want you to do something, but I don't think we can control the rhetoric in D.C. In fact, I think when we react to that, it actually strengthens the president's position. That's what he wants. I think it's a strategy, and we fall into the trap time and time again.
But it's not simply rhetoric; it's action.
Well, again, we have to wait for whatever the action is that he takes against us here in this state, and react to that. And I think we have been doing that, but for all of us to fall into that trap, I think would be unfortunate, and it takes away from all the problems that exist here in Vermont today that we're not doing because we're focusing on the rhetoric that he wants to stir up, and I don't believe we can live in chaos for the next 3.5 years. We just have too much to do, too much to accomplish right here in Vermont.
Well, let's talk about some of the actions that have affected Vermonters already, or the state at large, particularly around immigration. I mean, we've been at the center of a handful of high-profile detentions by federal immigration authorities now. I mean, there is Rumesa Ozturk, the Tufts University student who was taken into custody at the end of March, who was briefly held in Vermont and is now in Louisiana. There's also the case of the Upper Valley resident, Mohsen Madawi, who was taken into custody a couple weeks ago. After Rumesa Ozturk was taken into custody, you said that we should be ashamed that these types of unlawful detentions are happening. Is there anything else that your administration can do to stop more of these types of detentions from occurring in Vermont or from people being brought here?
Well, a couple of things. It really is the how they've been taken into custody, I think is unfortunate. I think law enforcement or immigration officials with masks on, it feels to me like we're a third world country. And I think we should be better than that. We should be more professional. And if there's an issue, if there's evidence that these individuals are a threat to the security of our nation or Vermont, then we should make this information known almost immediately, not have to wait. in this situation, in some of those situations, it feels as though, from my perspective, that we're mad at somebody for them exercising their individual right here in this country. Freedom of speech, it's something that we all should rally behind. And if that's the case, if we're just mad at what they say, that's not a good enough reason. If there is real evidence and something to justify their detainment, then again we should know what that is. And if there isn't, they should release them.
We received an email from a listener named Mary urging you to end Vermont's agreement with federal immigration authorities. This agreement allows the feds to hold immigration detainees in Vermont prisons. And there's been a push by top Democrats in Vermont's Senate to end this memorandum of understanding. Mary writes, ICE doesn't belong in Vermont and its innocent captives don't belong in Vermont prisons. Do you think Vermont should continue to uphold this memorandum of understanding with federal immigration authorities?
Well, a couple of things on the MOU. There's a difference between the ICE and the Border Patrol and some of that. So we have to make sure that we're talking about the right thing here. In terms of this, I know what they want, and we do have this MOU that either side either party could pull it back, and we have to give 120 days notice in order to do that. We could do that, but again, the MOU expires sometime in August, so that doesn't make any sense from my perspective. We should just wait till the end and not renew it.
You think we should not renew it?
No, I didn't say that.
Oh.
I said rather than give them notice at this point, then we should just not renew it. It makes no sense because it's less than 120 days away before the end of the date when it has to be renewed and the MOU has to be signed again. I think it's a mistake. It would be a mistake if we had the power to end it tomorrow. I think it would be a mistake to do that. I think Mr. Madawi has said himself that he is happy to be here in Vermont. He's glad to be here in Vermont. He's going to get a fair shake. They treat him well there. He is allowed visitors, and we have a federal judge here that I think are a couple of federal judges that have common sense and are middle of the road and just want to get a fair trial. And I'm not sure you get that everywhere. So I think it's counterintuitive from my perspective to end it just because we don't like it. Where are they going to go then? They're going to be taken to another facility in another part of the country. And I think that we're doing our part here in treating people well.
So when that current memorandum, when it ends in August, do you believe it should be renewed?
Well, at this point, we'll discuss it. We have some time between now and then. I think things will be more clear by then. And again, there's some details within that agreement that we should talk about. But to end it at this point, and again, we can't. But if we could, I think it would be a mistake.
Well, while we're talking about immigration, I would like to ask you about the farm workers who were detained by U.S. Customs and Border Patrol earlier this month. Last week in a statement, you said that you are, quote, continuing to collect information to better understand the circumstances and facts around that detainment. Has your office learned anything in the past week that sheds light on why exactly that raid occurred in Franklin County?
Yeah, I mentioned this at my press briefing, and it looks like it happened just as I had suspected. Someone called in to Border Patrol to acknowledge that they thought that two people were crossing the border, had backpacks and so forth, and were walking through the woods. Border Patrol went to investigate. When they investigated, they found two individuals walking out of the woods, and at that point, they went to engage them, to talk with them, and one of them ran. And those are the two farm workers. And I understand why, with all the apprehension in terms of everything that's happening in the world today. They were scared. Had they not ran, things might have ended differently. But they did. One of them did, and a chase ensued, and they led them to others on the farm that were here as well, that were undocumented. So Border Patrol had no choice at that point than to take action. They can't just ignore when they see something that isn't legal. They had no choice but to do what they did. I don't believe that it was an organized raid. I think it was just an unfortunate situation that got out of control. Border Patrol responding to a call, and I have long been clear. Migrant workers are an essential part of our communities, and they're friends, they're neighbors, and they're part of the community, the economy, and workforce. So
Even those who
I,
are undocumented?
yeah. I mean, we've known they've been here for decades, and it's unfortunate because Congress and Congresses that have been led by both Democrats and Republicans over the last couple of decades have failed to act, and presidents same there, Democrats and Republicans alike. It's just way past time that we looked for ways for reform in our immigration policy that allows for at least work visas, extended expansion of the work visas, because we know we need them. They want to be here, and it's happening not just in Vermont, in every state, red and blue states alike. So I think everyone has an interest in progressing, but somebody has to take the first step. And there was almost a deal on the table in the last Congress, and President Trump, before he was elected, I think scuttled that because it didn't work for his political message during the campaign. But the campaign's over. He was elected, and now he should take some leadership and do something to expand this. And there are a number, again, Republican governors who have uh, have asked for this and have worked on it in the past, and will continue. Members of Congress, Republicans in the Congress. Marco Rubio in 2013, he was part of the Gang of Eight that had a plan together that had bipartisan support, but it never made it across the finish line. So because it didn't work for whoever, and it's far past time. We've kicked the can down the road long enough, and somebody has to be the adult here and step up.
We're speaking with Vermont's Governor Phil Scott. Let's pause for a short break here. When we come back, Governor, I'd like to turn to the topic of the tariffs and their effects on our cross-border relations with Quebec. And we'll also take a couple calls from our listeners. This is Vermont Edition. Stay with us. Welcome back to Vermont Edition. I'm Michaela Lafrac. Our guest today is Vermont's Governor, Phil Scott. If you have a question for him, you can call in now at 800-639-2211. Let's go right to Robert in Burlington. Robert, you're on the air. Go ahead.
Our guest today is Governor Phil Scott.
Robert, are you with us?
Call in now at 800-639.
All right, we'll go back to Robert once we have him on. We did receive a call from a listener named Tim who asked not to be on air, but did want to know, Governor, about your thoughts on U.S.-Canada relations right now. Tim thinks that you should write a statement of support for Canada. We also got a similar note from Richard in Montpelier, who wants to know if you think the current level of scrutiny of Canadians at the border is warranted. What are your thoughts there?
Well, again, they're our largest trading partner. And it goes beyond that. They're part of who we are here in Vermont. A lot of families are connected, and we've enjoyed a great relationship with them over the years. I still stay in contact with premiers in different provinces throughout the northeast of Canada, and we just want to keep reassuring them that we're still here. Our feelings haven't changed. We're still friends, and we talk a lot about that. But they're angry and they're hurt, and I don't blame them at all in feeling the way they are. I think the president in particular has treated them poorly.
Do you
They're
see
our
yourself as
friends.
having, oh, excuse me, go ahead.
Yeah. No, go ahead.
I was just wondering if you see yourself, Governor, as having any sort of a diplomatic role at a time like this. Like, have you been meeting with any Quebecois leaders?
Yeah. Yes, I have.
What have those conversations been like?
Oh, it's just what I said. I mean, we're just reassuring them. They're reassuring us as well that they know that this isn't our fault, but they're hurt and angry, and with their election today, I hope from at this point that it's a resounding victory for one or the other because they need to be together. They and then we'll continue to work to make sure that they know that we're still here and we welcome them into our state and into our country.
You've convened a task force to study the effects of the tariffs on Vermont. What are your takeaways so far from that task force findings?
Well, again, it depends on which day, and that was part of the problem. The the president is erratic in his actions, especially when it comes to tariff. One day they're on, one day they're off, one day they're 25%, the next day they're 10, and then in the case of China, over 100%. So he's using them to bludgeon his opponents and tariffs, that is. And so it creates turmoil again, chaos, and it fits. I think it's part of his strategy. I think it's a failed strategy from my perspective, but we'll see how it all ends up. So as it turns out, didn't impose a lot of the tariffs that he threatened to impose, and in fact, some of them were covered under the USMCA, which I thought I gave him great credit back about 5, 6 years ago when he sealed that deal, and we had the USMCA that I thought was a fair agreement. And so, from my perspective, if you want to change our situation with Canada, just reopen the USMCA and and bargain those changes. That would have been simple without offending them.
We have our listener, Robert, back on the line, Robert in Burlington. Can you hear us now, Robert?
Yes, I'm sorry. I thought you were going to talk a little about tariffs before you took calls. So, Governor, I just really want to impress upon you that your nation needs you. Not just your state needs you, but your nation needs you and other Republicans of national stature, because we're having an existential problem in our country. We are losing our democracy. People are being rendered, kidnapped and rendered and put into prisons in foreign countries without any due process. All of our allies are going to abandon us. We're in deep trouble. We're in existential trouble. And 50 years ago, it took Republicans to confront Richard Nixon so that we could be rid of him. And it's going
Robert,
to
I'm gonna jump in. I'm sorry to cut you off, but I am hearing a call for stronger words of protest against the Trump administration. You're wanting that from our governor, and Governor Scott, you said now is not the time for that type of rhetoric.
Well,
Yes.
again, I'll take action when I think it's appropriate and when I think I can make a difference. I think I've proven that over the last number of years. I'm the only Republican governor who admitted that they didn't vote for President Trump. In fact, voted for their opponent. So I think I've proven that when I see the opportunity and think I can make a difference, I make that point known. But at the same time, he was elected. These are things he said he was going to do. These were things that many of us warned against. And so we're going to have to work through the Congress, work with this administration, but the courts have to step up as well and take action because that's the third branch of government that oversees what we do.
Well, just last week, the Trump administration sent a letter to states say that they could lose transportation funding if they don't cooperate with federal immigration authorities. One example of a program that could cross the federal government in this way is the driver's privilege cards that Vermont issues to people without lawful status to drive. We're one of 19 states and D.C. to issue these. I wonder if abiding by these state laws and sticking to these types of programs like these driver's privilege cards, do you see those as worth the potential loss of federal transportation dollars?
Yeah, we're still taking a look at that to see what the ramifications are at this point. Obviously, I just have to say, we don't have a great hand to play here in Vermont. We rely heavily on federal funding, and that's not good in this situation because they do hold a better set of cards than we do. So we have to reflect on that in each and everything that we do. And there are going to be times that we're going to say, it's worth losing the funds over the principal, and we're just going to have to tighten our belts in order to work our way through it. But it's just going to be a tough number of years now to get through that.
Well, let's focus on some of the issues a bit closer to home that are being debated in Montpelier right now, particularly the budget, which is in front of the Senate right now. What do you think, Governor, of where, say, the general fund base currently stands now that this budget bill has passed out of the House and is being considered by the Senate?
Yeah, I'm concerned about the spending pressure added on in the state or the Senate budget. It looks like it spends about another $50 million over what I recommended, and given everything we've been talking about, given the federal uncertainty, I don't think we should be too reliant on the base budget since we don't know what will happen in the future. We need to remain as flexible as possible to make sure when we decide to take a principled approach that we can backfill that and take care of those who are impacted, who have the greatest need. So this is going to be a bit of a juggling act over the next few years, and I just think that, again, we should keep it as flexible as possible, not spend any more than we have to, and keep money in reserve when we do. But at the same time, when we're looking at this budget, for instance, I think we need more money to be placed in some of the housing programs that we've had great success in, like VHIP, Vermont Housing Improvement Program. It's the lowest cost and has the fastest results of any housing program that we have to date. So there's that, and mobile home programs and so forth, and missing middle housing programs and all kinds of things like that. So we're trying to advocate with the Senate to put more money there and not put as much base pressure as they have on the overall budget.
Well, speaking of housing, let's take a moment to discuss Vermont's motel housing program, which has long been a source of contention between your administration and the Democratic-controlled legislature. And you've called the program a failure in the past for its high cost to the state and the fact that it doesn't seem to create a pipeline for moving people into more long-term housing. But now there's this plan that's making its way through the state house that would dissolve the program next summer and turn over funding and decision-making power to 5 regional nonprofits who would basically handle the state's homelessness response. What do you think of this approach?
I think it's when I first heard about it, probably a month and a half ago. I think it was a House proposal. I thought it was an interesting proposal, but details matter, and there are a lot of details that would have to be worked out before this program is implemented. A lot of guardrails would have to be put on the money. A lot of parameters would have to be talked about, and I'm not sure that we're there yet. It appears uh, from my perspective, it appears that it's spending more money than we are in the current program, which is a non-starter for me. At the very least, it shouldn't spend any more, and at best, it should be a ramp down in the future in terms of spending less money. They're proposing, I think it's around somewhere between 40 and 50 million for this program, and currently we're well below that by about $10 million. So again, long ways to go. I don't mind having the conversation, but it's going to have a lot of details, and we're going to have to get into that and make sure that we're not moving in the wrong direction here. Because again, I think what we have now, the expanded general assistance program, the hotel motel program that it's become, is a failure, and we need more congregate emergency shelters. We need to have eyes on the people in the system so that we can help them out of their situation.
And listeners, towards the end of the hour, we will be joined by Vermont Public and VT Diggers housing reporter Carly Berlin to discuss that program and others in more detail. Governor Scott, you've long called for reforms to Vermont's signature land use bill, Act 250. It was a big point of emphasis in the last couple sessions. It seems like it has been less so this legislative session. How do you feel at this point that the legislature is going to address some of your calls for reform to Act 250?
Yeah, well, I'm hoping that we, at the very least, can get extensions on some of the exemptions that were included in Act 181, because they sunset in 2026, and it just doesn't give enough time for us to provide for the housing that we desperately need. So there are many other pieces of the housing puzzle that I think that we need more help with. The bottom line is we just need to make it easier and less expensive to build. And one way to do that is through regulatory reform. And we have more opportunities to do that. We also need to extend some of the exemptions to areas that have water and wastewater. I think that makes sense. I also think we introduced our like a TIF program for housing called Spark, a financing tool for infrastructure, housing, economic development, and so forth. And they've renamed it and changed it a bit. I still like ours better, but we'll work with theirs and hopefully get that expanded to really leverage more of what we need.
Well, let's go back to the phones here. And listeners, if you're just joining us, we're speaking with Vermont's Governor, Phil Scott, who's in the midst of his 5th term. John is calling in from Barnet. John, you're on the air. Go ahead.
Yeah, hello, Governor. Not to say that Bernie isn't doing a bad job. I think he's doing a wonderful job. If he doesn't run again, would you consider running for his position? And thank you very much.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks for the question. I have no interest in going to Washington. I'm happy being right here in Vermont, and so I'll leave that to someone else.
Well, thank you, John, for calling in. Governor Scott, we last spoke to you on Vermont Edition in mid-December of last year. And at that time, we were all still processing the news that Republicans had gained, I think it was 17 seats in the Vermont House, 6 in the Senate, and the Democratic supermajority of last session was gone. And when I asked you then about what your hopes were for this upcoming legislative session. You said that you thought Republicans were going to gain this new seat at the table and there was going to be healthier debate in Montpelier on important issues. You said there will still be controversy and we'll disagree vehemently in some areas, but at the same time, I think we'll come to a better conclusion and everyone will have to give a little bit to get what they want. Have you seen that happening? Can you provide any examples of those types of cross-party compromises that I think everyone was hoping for back in December?
I think there has been a movement in the right direction in that regard. Let's not forget, the majority is still the majority. They set the agenda, they set the tone, and but I've had some good discussions with the speaker, in particular the pro tem as well, and I think that we do listen to one another, and I think education reform is a great example of that, and I think we've worked with the House. It wasn't ideal what they passed, but we agreed to help them move it through so we could get to the Senate and work with the Senate and keeping this thing moving. I think that's important. I think having more Republicans on committees so they have a voice has been important. They've been put some in chair positions on the committees. I think that's been helpful. So I think overall, while I have to say the majority has been struggling a bit with this new reality, at the same time, I think that we're moving in the right direction, and we'll see what happens over the next few weeks here. But at least we're speaking.
Well, let's go now to Stony, who's calling in from Shelburne. Stony, you're on the air.
Hi, Governor Scott. I'm Stony. I live in Shelburne, but I'm a vegetable farmer in Huntington. And I'm on Medicaid, like so many of us who work in farming and food. And over a third of all Vermonters, including children and our most vulnerable. And so I'm asking you, Governor Scott, if you will publicly call on Republican colleagues in Congress to oppose cuts to Medicaid.
Thanks, Stony.
Yeah, and I've been in discussions with other governors through the National Governors Association, as well as the New England governors. And I think we're all keenly aware of how problematic it would be for extreme cuts to Medicaid. We're, again, very, very reliant on the federal government in this area alone. Our demographics aren't working in our favor in that regard. So we are working with others. And when you look at other states, red states, with Republican governors, some of them are just as reliant as we are. So again, I'm hopeful that we can make some headway here. I think we're somewhat in agreement across the board. Republicans, Democrats alike, governors say, just walk carefully here. This could be very, very harmful for our states. So I'm again cautiously optimistic that we'll at least have a voice in this next round.
Thank you, Stony, for calling in. Governor, you had brought up education reform a few minutes ago, and before we have to let you go, I want to make sure we touch on that key subject. The House passed a bill a couple of weeks ago that was based on a very fragile tripartisan alliance. You said yourself, it was not a perfect bill. Nobody really thought it was, but everybody made concessions. That bill's now in front of the Senate, and you had criticized it, but 8 Republican lawmakers ended up voting to advance it. I wonder if you could tell us what exactly you wished had been different, and if it does come to your desk in a similar form as it's in today, would you sign it?
Oh, no, not anything like the House bill that came across. I have great hopes. The Senate, we've been, again, working continuously. Small group has been working continuously of leadership and to move this bill through the House and the Senate. So getting it from whatever they could do in the House, getting it to the Senate was important. And there's some pieces of the in the House bill, like the foundation formula, I think is important. That was a great move, and but there's more that needs to be done, which the Senate is working on. So again, I have high hopes that we're going to get something that at least gets us to the next stage, because this is a transition over a period of 3 years, so it can't happen overnight. And but if we falter, if we stumble, and we don't get all the pieces, the really core pieces passed, this could put it off for another couple of years after, and with increases of education costs associated with that, and property taxes increasing, it just puts us further behind. So, but I have great hopes that we'll get something through that we can all live with.
Governor Phil Scott, thank you so much for your time on Vermont Edition today.
Thank you very much.
And if you missed part of our conversation with the governor, you'll be able to find a transcript of the interview on vermontpublic.org. We do have to take one more quick break here. When we come back, housing reporter Carly Berlin will help us debrief and share some updates on housing and infrastructure programs that Vermont's lawmakers are working on right now. That's in just a minute on Vermont Edition. Stay with us. Welcome back to Vermont Edition. I'm Michaela Lafrac. If you're just joining us, we just concluded an interview with Governor Phil Scott. One of the topics that we discussed was the state's motel housing program. It's a topic that reporter Carly Berlin has been closely following for months now. Carly is a Report for America Corps member, who covers housing for Vermont Public and VT Digger. She joins me now. Carly, welcome.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, so over the past 5 years, the motel program in Vermont seems to have been expanded and contracted multiple times. Governor Scott has long been of the opinion that the motel housing program is a failure, a sentiment he reiterated just now. So this is no surprise. But he also seems a bit cautious about this new plan that's been put in place to replace it. Can you tell us more first about that plan?
Yeah, exactly. So this is a bill H91, and it would do something pretty radical. So it would basically dissolve the motel voucher program as it currently exists and shift it to a whole new initiative. The way to think about this broadly is that right now, the state is really the central actor when it comes to homelessness response. That happens in two different ways. The state gives out grants to traditional shelters to, be built and to run their operations. And then the state also runs the motel voucher program, which you can think of as like an overflow to the shelter system, which is always full. What H91 would do is instead give all of that funding that goes to shelters and motel vouchers and funnel it all through 5 regional anti-poverty nonprofits. Those groups would then get the decision-making power over how to respond to homelessness across Vermont. And so we could see this really, different, more localized, regionalized approach to how we respond.
Yeah. And Governor Scott said that there's still a lot of details that would need to get figured out before he feels okay about this. But also, yes, feeling like the motel housing program needs to be replaced or disbanded ASAP. So how do we balance those two things?
Right. I mean, we've been hearing members of his administration say for a few weeks now that they like this general direction. And like we just heard the governor say, the arguments are then in the details over how much this costs and how it will be run and how quickly it'll be implemented and all of those things. And I should say, too, I had a story a couple weeks ago that looked at this. There's a really long history of this idea of shifting oversight of the motel program, which was contentious even before it expanded during the pandemic, to local or regional groups. So it's not a new idea. It's one that the Department for Children and Families was actually really pushing in early 2020, right before all of this federal money came in to expand the motel program. So it's interesting to see it resurface now, and we'll have to see if it really has legs.
So to be completely clear, would people still be put up in motels?
So that would be a decision of these community action organizations. So think of groups like CVOEO, the Champlain Valley Office of Economic Opportunity, Brock and Bennington and Rutland. These groups would go through basically like a regional planning process, and they would decide, okay, maybe we want to spend a chunk of this money to set up more specialty shelters or fund it or use the funding for more homeless prevention programs, helping people pay back rent, things like that. Or they could say, we actually need a chunk of this money to go towards motel rooms for people, and maybe they have like an agreement with a particular hotel or motel in their region where they have a block of rooms. So we could still see that, and we have heard the administration say, we really want to make sure that this is not just a regional version of the motel program where we still see a lot of people put up in rooms without a whole lot of support.
And cost-wise, we're still not totally sure how much this would cost compared to the current program?
So, and the House has passed this bill already, and in their version, they've said we want to see basically all of the money in the current fiscal year for both those traditional shelter programs and the motel program go towards this new program when it's implemented a year from now.
Okay.
So they're hoping for that kind of level funding. What the governor was getting at there is where the motel program has actually underspent in this current year. So he wants to see those costs constrained. And we've heard, similar points made by the DCF commissioner in Senate testimony in recent weeks.
So Governor Scott also discussed the Act 250 reforms that he has long pushed for. They've been less of a focus this legislative session than they have in the last couple, it seems. Can you tell us a little bit more about what his administration has been hoping for in terms of Act 250 reform, and perhaps also why those seem to not have been a priority in Montpelier in the way that they were?
Yeah, I mean, last year, as you remember, we talked about it a lot. There was a huge reform package to basically overhaul how Act 250 works. Years-long mapping process. Won't get too into the weeds on that right now.
The tiers? You don't want to talk about the tiers? Okay. TIER.
But important thing to know is that bill, Act 181 last year, put in a couple of interim exemptions for certain kinds of housing projects that basically said, if you want to build this, X number of units in X place, like you can do it without an Act 250 permit. What Governor Scott just talked about is his administration has really wanted to see those exemptions expanded. So, where they could be used, expanded and extended for a couple more years. There has not been a lot of oxygen in the room to reopen this bill that was really quite contentious last year to, get to a final version. So, the legislature has not spent a whole lot of time looking at some of these pieces that Scott's administration brought forward back in January.
Okay. Well, the legislature has been working on a pretty interesting housing finance program that you have written about. Many developers and small town leaders seem to be pretty excited about it. It's known as the CHIP program. Could you tell us a little bit more?
Yeah, so CHIP is the Community and Housing Infrastructure Program. This is basically a smaller scale version of Vermont's longstanding TIF program, another acronym for you, tax increment financing. So the way that this sort of scheme works is for TIF, big TIF, municipalities can borrow money for public infrastructure like roads and sidewalks and wastewater projects in an area where they want to see growth, with the expectation that the new infrastructure is going to spur new development, and then the increased tax revenue from the new development pays off the debt for the infrastructure.
Bada bing, bada boom.
Simple, right?
Yeah.
So, traditionally, TIF has been used in these large districts, larger towns. It can be complex to oversee. And so the idea with this new version, CHIP, is basically the same concept, but on the scale of a single project. So like, say a small town wants to, help put in the infrastructure needed to build one apartment building. This would be scaled in a way where they could access this.
Okay. So little TIF.
Little tiff.
Okay, so amidst all of this that's going on in Montpelier at the state level, I mean, there's all this uncertainty at the federal level. And of course, Vermont, like many, many other states, receives a lot of federal funds for housing and homelessness programs. Are there any that you have been following, any specific programs at the federal level that have been cut in recent months or are currently on the chopping block?
I would say broadly speaking, everyone in Vermont's housing universe is sort of in wait and see mode on this. So, there's been a few cuts so far. One notable one is for fair housing, outreach, and education. That grant to the Champlain Valley Office of Economic Opportunity got terminated by DOGE earlier this year. But in terms of, some of the big funding sources, like for Section 8 vouchers, funding for affordable housing construction and homelessness response, everyone who works in that world in Vermont is saying right now, we're waiting to see where the chips fall. Cuts are likely coming down the road, but we don't know a whole lot quite yet.
Does that seem to be affecting conversations that you've been listening in on in Montpelier in the State House?
Definitely. I mean, I think there's, to step back a little bit, during the COVID years, we had this huge influx of money into the affordable housing pipeline to just get more units built. That funding is now all allocated. Projects are finishing up, or some that were delayed or just getting started building. But the point is that pipeline is slowing down. There has not been a whole lot of appetite at the state level to put up a whole bunch more capital into that system. And now everyone is looking at the federal landscape and saying, oh gosh, what has gone along at like a pretty nice clip here is going to slow way down.
So we have about, a month, 2 months left of the legislative session.
Couple weeks.
We'll
see.
Ah!
We'll see.
Excuse me for screaming into the microphone. Time is flying. What are you going to be focusing on over these next few weeks? What are your priorities as a housing reporter?
Yeah, I mean, I'll be watching really closely H91, this motel program regionalization bill we just talked about. I'll be really curious to see how the Senate might change that and what the administration wants to see ultimately. I'll obviously be keeping eyes on the budget and where the motel program, which is a perennial budget fight, where we see that land in the next couple weeks here. And then I'll be looking at the CHIP program and some other pieces that are in these housing packages that have been floating around in both chambers. We'll see where they end up.
Is it really just a couple weeks? You're right. That's crazy.
Well, we'll see. Do they have an adjournment date set?
Yeah. Midday. It looks like, oh my gosh. All right. Time is ticking. Carly Berlin, Vermont Public and VT Diggers housing reporter. Thank you so much for talking us through all of these issues today. We appreciate it.
Thanks for having me, Michaela.
And if there is a issue in the State House that you are wanting to learn more about that you haven't heard us discuss too much in the past few months, we know we've had a lot on all of our collective plates, you can always email us at vermontedition@vermontpublic.org. Maybe there's a particular bill or program that you've been advocating for that you think deserves a little bit more airtime. Well, please tell us about it. You can tell our reporters. Again, vermontedition@vermontpublic.org is the way that you can get in touch with us. Tomorrow on the program, we are going to be discussing forestry and how we can both conserve state and private forested lands in our region while also keeping our timber industry surviving and thriving. There's a lot of different ideas on how to do this, and we are going to hear from a bunch of different folks who have spent their lives focusing on Vermont's forests. Again, that's tomorrow at noon, and if you want to weigh in on that process, well, you know what our email is now. All right, that is all the time that we have for Vermont Edition today. Thanks for everyone for listening to our conversation with the governor, and you'll be able to find a transcript of that interview as well as some notes on it with our key takeaways on vermontpublic.org later today. Our show is directed by Mary Angish, and our managing producer is John Ahrens. Our producers are Andrea Lorian and Daniela Fierro. Anna Berg is our intern, and our call screener today was Kelly Delorier. Our theme music was composed by Myra Flynn. I'm Michaela Lafrac. Thank you so much for listening, and we'll catch up again soon.